Welcome back to the woods. Find a quiet place, maybe a cup of tea or something warm, and let's step together into a slower world, where the days pass gently and small creatures live simple, beautiful lives beneath the trees. The roots of morning. The first true rain of spring came quietly, slipping through the forest before dawn. It was a gentle, whispering rain, steady, patient, and full of scent, the kind that soaked into the moss and loosened the soil, drawing out the green beneath the brown. By the time morning came, the world smelled of wet bark, fern, and something faintly sweet, like earth waking from a long dream. At the edge of a small glen, where the birches leaned close together as if sharing secrets, a hedgehog stirred in his burrow. His den was small but tidy, built under a tangle of roots that had long ago woven themselves into a natural arch inside. Everything was arranged just so. A dry patch for sleeping, a little shelf carved into the soil wall for jars and dried seeds, and near the entrance, a round, flat stone that served as his table. He blinked his small eyes against the dim light, then gave a long stretch, his quills rustling softly. The rain made a soft, constant drumming above. He murmured, "Perfect morning for tea." He shuffled toward the entrance, took a small clay kettle from his shelf, and filled it from the rainwater trickling off a fern leaf outside. Then, humming quietly to himself, he set it on his little firestone, fed the embers with dried moss, and waited for the water to heat. Outside, the forest was veiled in silver mist. Drops clung to every blade of grass and dripped from the birch leaves in slow rhythm. The hedgehog liked mornings like this, when the world moved slower, when everything seemed to be listening. He poured the hot water over a pinch of crushed juniper and wild mint, letting the steam curl upward. The scent filled the den, sharp and clean. He took the cup to the doorway and sat watching the rain for a long time, his small feet tucked beneath him. Down the slope, the glen opened into a shallow pond fed by a trickling stream. A family of ducks were already awake, paddling lazily between the reeds, their soft quacks carrying through the mist. Somewhere beyond, the call of a thrush echoed once, clear and round. The hedgehog sipped his tea and sighed. Not a bad beginning, he said to no one in particular. He was halfway through his second cup when he heard it, a faint, irregular splash from down by the pond. Then another, then a muffled grumble. He frowned and set his cup aside. Now what could that be? He grabbed his small walking stick, a smooth piece of ash wood polished from years of use, and made his way down the damp path toward the water. By the pond's edge, the mist was thicker. He had to squint to see clearly, but there, half hidden among the reeds, was a rather flustered-looking frog, knee-deep in mud and glaring at a basket tangled in cattails. The hedgehog cleared his throat politely. "Morning." The frog nearly jumped out of his skin. Oh, morning. Didn't see you there." "Seems the basket didn't either," said the hedgehog mildly. "You're in quite a predicament." "It's this blasted thing," said the frog, tugging at the basket handle. "Came floating down the stream last night. Thought it might have something useful in it. Instead, it stuck fast." The hedgehog peered closer. The basket was sturdy but old, woven from reeds and sealed with pitch. The frog's webbed fingers slipped uselessly on the wet surface. "Hold on," said the hedgehog. "Let's do this properly." He found a long branch and wedged it under the rim, using his small weight to lever it up while the frog steadied the other side. With a satisfying squelch, the basket came free and bobbed to the surface. "Ah," said the frog, triumphant. "Teamwork." "Indeed," said the hedgehog, brushing mud from his paws. "Now, let's see what all this effort was for." The frog pried open the lid. Inside, instead of food or tools, they found bundles of dried river grass, a few cracked clay marbles, and a piece of paper tied with twine, its edges wrinkled but intact. "Strange cargo," murmured the hedgehog. The frog untied the twine carefully, then unfolded the damp paper. The writing was faded, but still legible enough. If found, please deliver to the Willow Hollow Mill. It belongs there. The frog's eyes widened. The old mill? But that's far downriver. No one's lived there in ages. The hedgehog's whiskers twitched. Still, if it says it belongs there, it must have a reason. Could be an adventure, said the frog, grinning. It's been a dull week. The hedgehog hesitated, then smiled faintly. A slow, wet day like this. I suppose it could use some purpose. And so, they set off, the hedgehog with his stick, the frog carrying the damp basket between his webbed hands. The rain had softened into a misty drizzle, and the forest glowed with that strange, muted brightness that comes after a storm. The path followed the stream as it wound through thickets of fern and young alder trees. Here and there, the water pooled into small basins where tadpoles wriggled and tiny fish darted like silver sparks. The hedgehog kept a steady pace, careful not to slip on the wet roots, while the frog hopped ahead, humming tunelessly. They stopped once under an old cedar to share a small loaf the hedgehog had packed. Dense seed bread sweetened with berries. The frog ate quickly, as frogs often do, while the hedgehog chewed thoughtfully, enjoying the rhythm of rain tapping on the leaves above. As they neared the bend in the stream, the frog paused and pointed. Look there, do you see that? Through the thinning mist, a figure was standing on the opposite bank, tall and slender, wrapped in a patchwork coat. A heron. He was staring down at the water, unmoving, his long beak tilted as if listening. Then, without looking up, he spoke. You're following the basket. The hedgehog blinked. We are. The heron nodded slowly. It drifted past me before dawn, nearly tangled my legs. You mean to take it to the mill? That's what the note said, replied the frog. You know the place? I do, said the heron. His voice was low, almost like wind in reeds. Old stones, broken wheel, but the heart still turns if you listen close. The hedgehog tilted his head. You mean the water wheel? The heron's eyes gleamed faintly. Something like that. He spread his wings then, droplets scattering in a fine spray. Follow the stream till the birch's end, then take the path of the two willows. You'll see what you're meant to find. And before they could ask more, he stepped lightly into the air and was gone, vanishing through the mist, leaving only the faint ripple of disturbed air behind. The frog stared after him. Well, he said finally, that was mysterious. The hedgehog smiled a little. Herons usually are. Do you think he meant it literally? What we're meant to find? I think, said the hedgehog, tightening his grip on the walking stick. We'll find out soon enough. They continued along the stream, the forest opening wider now, the trees taller, the lights stronger as the clouds began to thin. The air smelled of wet wood and the faint, sweet tang of new growth. As they rounded another bend, the sound reached them, a low, steady turning noise like the breathing of something enormous and half asleep. The mill, said the hedgehog softly. Ahead, through the reeds, the old willow hollow mill stood, leaning slightly to one side, its stones moss-covered, the great wooden wheel still turning slowly in the stream. The closer they drew to the mill, the more the air seemed to shift, thicker, heavier, charged with something that made the fur on the hedgehog's back prickle. The water wheel turned lazily, each creak echoing through the clearing like the breath of something ancient. Moss and ivy clung to the mill's stone walls, draping it in green like an old cloak. Ferns grew from the cracks, and in the shadow of the broken roof, tiny swallows darted in and out, chirping faintly. The frog set the basket down on a flat rock and wiped his webbed hands. Well, he said, peering up, it doesn't look like much of a heart, if you ask me. The hedgehog said nothing. He stepped closer, the scent of damp wood and iron filling his nose. The wooden door hung crooked on its hinges, half swallowed by vines. With a soft grunt, he pushed, and the door gave way with a groan that made both of them wince. Inside, the air was cool and stale, carrying the scent of old grain and dust. Shafts of light streamed through holes in the roof, catching motes that drifted like tiny golden seeds. The mill's inner wheels still turned slowly, powered by the steady trickle of water from the stream. The sound filled the whole space, a deep, rhythmic thudding that seemed almost like a pulse. The frog's voice was small when he spoke. "It's still working." "Barely," murmured the hedgehog, "but yes, alive in its way." They wandered deeper in. Rusted tools hung from nails. Broken barrels lay scattered, their contents long gone. But near the far wall, half buried under fallen beams and moss, something caught the hedgehog's eye. A wooden chest, small and bound with copper bands gone green from age. "Look there," he said softly. The frog hopped forward eagerly. Treasure? Maybe, or maybe more work. Together, they cleared the debris and pulled the chest free. The lid was sealed tight, but the frog found a thin crack and wedged his fingers in, while the hedgehog pressed the end of his walking stick under the latch. With a bit of effort and one sharp pop, the chest opened. Inside was a single, round glass jar filled with something golden and thick. "Honey, just honey," the frog said, disappointed. But the hedgehog's attention wasn't on the jar. It was on a faint engraving inside the lid. Letters, carved by hand, so old they were barely visible. To keep the heart turning, one must feed it the sweetness of the forest. He looked at the frog. The heart, the wheel. The honey keeps it turning. The frog frowned. "You think someone's been feeding honey to a water wheel?" "Not the wheel," the hedgehog murmured. "Something beneath it." He turned, gaze sweeping across the room. Beneath the central shaft where the wheel's axle entered the floor, there was a hollow, a space where the stone was darker, as if wet from within. From there came a faint hum, low and constant, almost like a whisper. "Help me move that plank." The frog hesitated but obeyed. Together they pried up one of the loose boards, revealing a narrow gap below. A faint golden glow flickered in the darkness. The hedgehog's quills bristled. "There's light under there." The frog peered in. "How's that possible?" Without answering, the hedgehog knelt and lowered the jar of honey toward the gap. The glow seemed to respond, pulsing once like a slow heartbeat. Then, as the first drop of honey fell through the crack, the sound beneath the floor deepened. The wheel outside groaned, then began to spin faster. The light below brightened. The air filled with the faint hum of something vast and unseen. The frog stumbled back. "What did you do?" "I think," said the hedgehog quietly, "I fed it." The glow spread, creeping out through the seams of the floor, tracing the edges of the mill in delicate golden lines. The old wood shuddered, then steadied, as though the whole structure had drawn breath. A soft, melodic sound filled the space. Not quite a voice, not quite a song, but something between the two. It seemed to echo from the beams themselves, from the dripping walls and the turning wheel. Long have I slept, waiting for the sweetness to return. The frog froze. Did the mill just talk? The hedgehog bowed his head slightly. "Yes," he whispered, "and I think it remembers us." The light coiled around them, warm and soft. The frog's reflection shimmered in the wet stone, eyes wide. "The forest's pulse weakens when the sweetness is gone," the voice continued. "I am its heart, bound to its streams and roots. You have brought what was lost." The hedgehog stepped closer to the light. Then the basket. "A vessel," said the voice. "A message carried by water. The one who first left it trusted that the forest would send kind souls." The frog swallowed hard. "Kind souls, eh? That's generous." The voice gave a sound that might have been laughter, soft as falling rain. "Kindness is found where curiosity lives. You have done what many would not." Followed a whisper where there was no promise of reward. The glow dimmed, fading back toward the hollow beneath the floor. "The streams will run clearer now." The roots will strengthen. When next the rains come, the forest will remember. Then the light went out. The wheel slowed again, settling into its old, steady rhythm. The hum faded. For a moment, there was only silence. The dripping of rain through the roof, the soft croak of a frog outside. The hedgehog let out a long breath. Well, the frog blinked. That was something. They stayed a while longer, making sure the mill was stable, and placed the now empty honey jar gently back into the chest. Before they left, the hedgehog set the chest near the wheel again and covered it with a dry cloth. Just in case it ever needs more, he said. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The forest glittered, every leaf bright, every puddle shining. The stream that ran beside the mill flowed clearer than before, as though the water itself had been washed clean. The frog took one last look back at the leaning structure. You think it's really alive? The hedgehog smiled faintly. Everything in this forest is alive. Some things just speak quieter than others. They followed the stream home, the basket now empty but lighter somehow, the sound of the wheels still faintly echoing behind them. The mist had lifted entirely, and sunlight poured through the canopy in golden streaks. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The hedgehog walked with his stick tapping softly on the stones, and the frog hopped along beside him, occasionally glancing up at the bright sky. When they reached the glen again, the ducks were waiting, as though expecting a story. Well, said the frog, turns out baskets can lead to talking buildings and forest hearts. Who would have guessed? The hedgehog chuckled, sitting back by his door. Adventure always starts with something small, even a splash in the reeds. He poured them both a bit of tea, mint and juniper again, and together they sat watching the sun pierce through the last of the clouds. The world felt a little larger than before, a little more awake. That evening, long after the hedgehog and frog had returned home, the forest settled into one of those rare, perfect silences that seemed to hum with life. The air was cool, washed clean by the afternoon rain. A soft mist curled over the moss and drifted lazily between the trunks. The small brook, now running brighter than before, sang its clear tune as it wound its way past stones and roots, reflecting the silver of the early moon. The hedgehog sat by his small round window, a candle flickering beside him. His quills caught the faint golden light as he worked on mending a pair of old gloves. His movements were slow, thoughtful. Every so often, he would pause and glance toward the forest beyond the glass, where the shadows of the trees swayed gently. He couldn't stop thinking about the mill, the glow, the voice, the sense that something beneath the forest had stirred again. Not in a frightening way, but like the slow waking of an ancient friend. He wondered how long it had been asleep, and who had once cared for it before time and neglect buried its heart. Down the path, the frog was wide awake too. His cottage, smaller and made of woven reeds, glowed faintly from within. He sat at his table with a cup of mint tea, staring at the small chest they had brought back. Not the one they had found in the mill, but another they'd noticed tucked in the reeds near the bank when they left. He hadn't opened it yet. It was simple, carved from birch, tied with a length of twine. After a while, curiosity got the better of him. He untied the string carefully and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment and a small glass vial filled with something pale green, faintly glowing. The paper was old, edges curled, the ink faded but still readable. For the hands that bring sweetness to the heart, it said, "Let this serve to soothe the restless roots." The frog blinked. "Restless roots," he murmured, tapping his chin. He poured a drop of the liquid onto his palm. It was cool to the touch, smelling faintly of sap and fresh rain. He didn't know what it meant, but something about the words and the strange peace he felt holding the vial told him it was important. He looked toward the window, where fireflies flickered near the brook. "Better show this to him in the morning," he said softly, corking the bottle and placing it gently beside the lamp. By dawn, the fog was thick again, low and silver, wrapping the forest in silence. The hedgehog woke early, brewed a strong pot of tea, and stepped outside just as the frog came hopping up the path, chest in hand. "I found something," the frog said before he was even close enough to greet properly. The hedgehog's eyes widened. "Another chest? Where?" "By the reeds, near where we left the mill." The frog handed it over. "There's a note inside and some kind of sap. Glowing sap." The hedgehog took the vial, turning it slowly in the light. The liquid shimmered faintly, green as the first leaves of spring. "This looks like resin," he murmured, "but it's alive somehow. It's moving, see?" Sure enough, the substance inside pulsed gently, like the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. The frog frowned. "What do you think it means to soothe the restless roots?" The hedgehog looked toward the trees. Perhaps that the forest's heart isn't the only thing that needed sweetness. They followed the stream again that morning, baskets empty, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. The forest felt different now, brighter somehow, more alert. Birds darted between the branches, calling softly, and the distant hum of insects filled the air. As they neared the old mill, the ground grew softer, the soil darker. The moss shimmered faintly where the morning light touched it. When they reached the clearing, the hedgehog noticed something new, faint green threads like glowing roots tracing patterns across the stones and into the earth below the mill. The frog knelt, brushing his hand against one. It felt cool, soft, and alive. "They weren't here yesterday," he whispered. "No," said the hedgehog. The heart woke up. Now the roots remember. They followed the glowing lines down toward the edge of the water, where the current had slowed, caught on something beneath the surface. There, tangled among the roots, was a small tree, its trunk bent and split, as though lightning had struck it long ago. Yet from its broken bark, new shoots had begun to grow, tiny and pale. The hedgehog crouched beside it. "Perhaps this is where it begins," he said quietly, "or where it needs to be healed." He took the vial and unstoppered it carefully. The liquid shimmered in the sunlight. "A drop," he murmured, "for the roots." The frog leaned closer. "You think that'll work?" "Only one way to find out." The hedgehog poured the faint green sap onto the broken wood. It soaked in instantly, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the earth gave a deep, soft sound, a sigh like wind through hollow stone. The glowing roots brightened, running in intricate veins beneath the soil. The brook surged, clearing further, and the air filled with the scent of pine and honey. The frog stumbled back. "I think it worked." The hedgehog smiled, eyes reflecting the light. "I think the forest is breathing again." They stayed a while, tending to the small tree, propping it with stones and moss so it would stand upright. The light around it faded slowly back to normal daylight, leaving only a faint green hue in the bark, as if it had been painted by spring itself. When they were done, they sat on a fallen log near the mill and unpacked their small meal: a few slices of brown bread, a wedge of cheese, and some pickled carrots. The frog took a long sip of water, sighing. "I still don't understand how a tree can breathe like that," he said. "Maybe it's not meant to be understood," said the hedgehog. "Maybe it's just meant to be cared for." The frog nodded slowly, staring out at the glimmering brook. "It's strange," he said after a while. "Yesterday, I thought we were just delivering a basket. Now it feels like the whole forest's been watching us." The hedgehog smiled softly. "Maybe it has. Maybe it always was." The wind moved gently through the leaves, and the water wheel creaked in rhythm with the slow hum of the stream. The hedgehog leaned back, hands folded over his chest, eyes half closed. "For once," he said quietly, "it feels like everything's as it should be." And for that brief, bright moment, it was... That night, the forest did not sleep. Not in the way it used to, with soft rustles fading into stillness and the faint trickle of the brook lulling every creature into dreams. This time, there was movement, subtle, quiet, but alive. The wind drifted through the birches, carrying with it the scent of resin and honey. Somewhere in the deep woods, a tree groaned softly, stretching after a long slumber. Fireflies pulsed like little lanterns, weaving above the moss in rhythmic patterns that mirrored the slow, steady pulse beneath the earth. The hedgehog lay in bed, eyes half open, feeling it. The forest's hum, faint but unmistakable. It was in the air, in the soil under his burrow, even in the creak of his wooden walls. A comfort, but also a call. He rolled over, muttered something about never-ending chores, and drifted back to sleep. But not the frog. He couldn't rest. He sat by his window, chin propped in his hands, watching the mist roll off the stream. Every few moments, his gaze wandered toward the mill, hidden behind the trees and the early morning haze. There was something about that place, not frightening, but magnetic. Just before dawn, unable to ignore the pull any longer, he grabbed his lantern and his small leather satchel and started toward the sound of running water. The forest before sunrise was a different world. Everything seemed half-born, shapes of trees fading in and out of the mist, the path glistening with dew, the faint cry of an owl still echoing from somewhere above. When he reached the mill, he found the brook alive with light. It wasn't bright, but enough to shimmer faintly where the water rippled, as if moonlight had taken root beneath its surface. The wheel turned slowly, steady and quiet. "Morning," came a voice from the shadows. The frog startled. "You again?" The hedgehog emerged from behind a stack of logs, pipe in mouth, eyes amused. "Couldn't sleep either." The frog sighed. "I thought I'd beat you to it." They stood together at the water's edge. The little bent tree they'd healed yesterday was glowing faintly, a steady green shimmer under its bark. The air felt charged, not with danger, but with life. The hedgehog pointed with his stick. "See that? Roots have spread." He was right. The soil around the tree had shifted overnight, cracked slightly, and from the fissures came thin, shining threads. The same faint light they'd seen before, crawling slowly outward through the moss, weaving through pebbles and stretching toward the brook. The frog crouched low. "They're growing. Toward the water," said the hedgehog. "It's drawing them." They watched for a while in silence, the only sounds the murmur of the stream and the creak of the wheel. Then the frog said, "Maybe it's feeding the forest again, spreading the sweetness." The hedgehog nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Maybe, or maybe it's remembering what it used to be." They stayed through sunrise. By the time the first golden rays broke through the canopy, the mist had lifted, revealing the full shape of the clearing. The mill, the leaning tree, the path winding off into the woods. And now, new colors shimmered across it. Patches of moss that had been dull and gray now gleamed with a healthy green. Tiny wildflowers opened as the light hit them, and the water turned clear enough to see every pebble beneath. The frog took off his hat and let the sun warm his head. "Feels like spring again," he murmured. The hedgehog smiled. "A bit of honey and sap, and the whole forest wakes." "Strange, isn't it?" the frog said. "How something forgotten could still be so alive." "Not strange," said the hedgehog. "Just patient." They spent the morning walking the banks, checking the flow of the stream, and setting small stones to help guide the water. When they grew hungry, they shared what they'd packed: brown bread, soft cheese, and a jar of pickled wild garlic the hedgehog had made last autumn. The air smelled of mint and wet bark, the kind of scent that lingered and filled one's chest with quiet ease. After they'd eaten, they sat for a while under the bent tree, leaning against its trunk. "You ever think," said the frog lazily, "that maybe the forest watches us?" "All the time," said the hedgehog, closing his eyes. "That's why I always say good morning to the trees." The frog grinned. "Do they answer back?" "Not in words," said the hedgehog, "but sometimes the leaves move differently. You learn to listen for it." By late afternoon, clouds began to gather. The air thickened with the promise of rain, and a soft wind swept through the branches, carrying the faint smell of thunder. The frog looked up, squinting. "You think it'll storm?" The hedgehog tapped his pipe on the log. "Could, but a little rain will do the roots good." They started back home, the sky dimming above them. Birds darted for cover, and the forest grew quiet, that hushed stillness that comes right before a downpour. The first drops came as they reached the bend in the path. The frog tilted his head back, catching one on his tongue. "Sweet," he said, surprised. The hedgehog raised an eyebrow. "Sweet." The frog nodded, blinking. "Taste it. It's not normal rain." The hedgehog did, reluctantly, holding out his paw to catch a drop. He tasted it and frowned. "You're right. The rain smelled faintly of honey." They looked at each other, then back toward the direction of the mill. "You think it's the heart again?" the frog asked. The hedgehog's eyes gleamed. "I think it's thanking us." The rain grew heavier, golden in the dim light, soaking the moss and the leaves. Each drop left behind a faint shimmer before fading, and soon the entire forest glowed as if lit from within. The two friends hurried home through the rain, laughing now, their fur and skin glistening with gold-tinted droplets. The frog slipped twice. The hedgehog pretended not to notice. By the time they reached the hedgehog's burrow, they were drenched but smiling. "Tea," said the hedgehog. "Always," said the frog, grinning. Inside, the warm scent of nettle and pine filled the air. The hedgehog poured them both steaming cups, and they sat by the fire listening to the rain's rhythm. After a while, the frog said, "Do you think the forest will change now?" "For good." The hedgehog looked into his cup, then at the small window, where golden raindrops still traced lines down the glass. "No," he said quietly, "not for good. Nothing ever stays one way. But maybe it'll remember longer this time." The frog nodded slowly. "Maybe that's enough." Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft, shimmering, each drop landing with the faintest whisper, as if the forest itself were humming a tune. And somewhere beneath the soil, the roots pulsed, slow, deep content. By morning, the golden rain had stopped. The forest lay clean and bright, glittering as if every leaf had been polished. The air held a sweet, earthy perfume, half honey, half pine resin, and the brook now ran quicker, laughing over the stones. It carried flecks of gold dust in its current, tiny glimmers that caught the sunlight and vanished as soon as one tried to focus on them. The hedgehog stepped outside, squinting against the light. His doorway smelled of wet bark and mint. The soft moss path leading to the brook was damp beneath his paws. He filled his lungs with the cool air, sighed contentedly, then frowned at the sight of the frog lying on his back atop a flat rock, mouth open, trying to catch the golden motes floating through the morning haze. "You'll get a sore throat before breakfast," the hedgehog called. The frog propped himself on his elbows and grinned. "Just seeing if any taste like honey. Not one yet. Because they're not honey, you fool. They're probably something mineral. Then why do they smell like pancakes?" The hedgehog opened his mouth to retort, then stopped. He inhaled. The frog was right. There was a faint sweetness in the air, like warm batter and clover blossoms. Somewhere nearby, a bird called, the kind that only sang after rain, a trilling sound that made the morning feel lighter. "Pancakes or not," said the hedgehog, "it's a good day for breakfast." They set a small fire beside the brook. The frog fetched a handful of mushrooms that had sprouted overnight, wide and pale with rain still beaded on their caps. The hedgehog added flour from a small tin, a pinch of salt, and water from the stream. The smell of sizzling batter mixed with the steam of tea steeping in a battered tin pot. By the time they were eating, flat cakes filled with mushrooms and herbs, the sun was high enough to scatter gold across the surface of the water. They ate in silence, both watching how the light played on the brook. The frog swallowed and said quietly, "You think the mill's still humming?" The hedgehog nodded. I'd bet my walking stick on it. After breakfast, they decided to visit again. Not out of worry, but curiosity, an urge to see whether yesterday's magic or whatever it was had lasted. The forest path was different now. Ferns that had been limp and dark green were upright and gleaming. The bark of the trees seemed richer, the moss thicker underfoot. And where the roots of one fallen birch crossed the trail, tiny white mushrooms had appeared overnight, each tipped with a dot of gold. The frog knelt beside them. "It's spreading," he whispered. The hedgehog touched one lightly. "Growing," he corrected. When they reached the clearing, the mill looked transformed. It still leaned, still bore its patches of moss and its old scars, but now it shone. Not with the strange glow of the night before, but with the quiet, proud gleam of something repaired, renewed. The wheel turned faster than they'd ever seen it, the water rushing beneath with purpose. The small bent tree beside it stood taller now, its bark pale green, leaves trembling with light. And along the banks, small sprouts of wildflowers, bluebells, wood anemones, and tiny white stars had sprung up overnight. The frog let out a low whistle. "I'd call that heal." The hedgehog smiled. "And I'd call that proof." "Proof of what?" "That care works better than wonder." The frog looked at him quizzically, but said nothing. They wandered around the mill for a while, examining the roots and the water. The frog spotted something curious where the stream curved, a cluster of wooden stakes half buried in the mud, connected by a thin cord. Following it, they found what looked like an old water gauge, half submerged, still marked with faint carvings. Someone measured the water once, the frog said, tracing the notches. The hedgehog knelt beside him. Maybe the old keeper of the mill, whoever carved the message under the lid. They both stared at the worn tool for a long time. Then the frog said softly, "You think whoever it was, they're still around somewhere?" The hedgehog shook his head slowly. "No, but I think their work is." Around midday, a light breeze moved through the clearing, setting the leaves to shimmering. The sound of bees rose faintly in the distance, slow, steady hums, the forest's oldest workers already drawn to whatever sweetness lingered. The frog stretched and said, "We could take some of that honey home, maybe start a bit of storage for winter." The hedgehog looked toward the mill and frowned. "No, let's stay. It's feeding something bigger than us." The frog considered that, then nodded. "Fair enough. But if the bees find it first, don't blame me when they move in. Bees know better than to take more than they need," said the hedgehog. "We could learn from them." The frog laughed. "Speak for yourself. I could eat another dozen of those mushroom cakes." "Exactly my point." When the path curved toward home, the hedgehog stopped and looked back once more. Through the trees, he could just see the faint outline of the mills while turning, the water catching the light. "You know," he said, "I think that place will be all right now." The frog nodded. "And if it isn't, we'll fix it again." The hedgehog chuckled. "You're learning. I'm a quick study, especially when there's food after." That evening, as the forest settled into its dusk rhythm, they sat outside the hedgehog's burrow again, sipping nettle tea and listening to the night insects tuning up their chorus. The air was warm, faintly sweet, filled with the scent of wet leaves. The frog leaned back on his elbows, gazing at the rising stars. So what now? No more mysteries to chase, no more glowing jars, no more honey rain. The hedgehog smiled faintly. "For now, we rest. That's the whole point of mending something. It lets you be still for a while." The frog tilted his head. "And after, said the hedgehog, pouring the last of the tea into his cup, "we see what else the forest remembers." They sat in silence after that, two small shapes against the soft glow of the burrow, the trees whispering above them, and a faint, far-off creak of the mill wheel turning steadily through the night. Days folded into one another like pages in a weathered book. The golden flecks that once drifted through the forest air grew fewer, until they were only memories, soft glimmers in the corners of the eye when the sun struck, just right. Yet something had changed in the woods, something quiet and deep. The brook, once a timid trickle, now sang clear and strong, carving graceful ribbons through moss and root. Trees that had leaned and creaked in the wind now stood steady, their bark newly roughened, sap pulsing within them like slow heartbeats. Birds nested closer to the water, trusting the air again. And the old mill, its wheel now steady and proud, had become the forest's quiet center. Not a shrine, not a relic, but a heartbeat. The hedgehog noticed it most in the mornings. The light fell differently now, softer, warmer. He found himself rising earlier without effort, drawn to the window where the air carried faint, rhythmic hums, as if the turning of the wheel had woven itself into the forest dawn. One such morning, while the mist still clung to the undergrowth, there came a knock at the burrow door. It was a polite knock, 3 soft taps, followed by a pause. When he opened it, he found the hare standing outside, ears perked, whiskers damp with dew. "Morning," said the hedgehog. "Morning," said the hare, fidgeting with a bundle of herbs in her paws. "You've been near the brook lately?" The hedgehog nodded. "Yesterday." "What?" The hare looked back down the path, as though afraid someone might overhear. "Something's happening. My burrow's nearest the edge of the meadow. You know that little hollow where the 2 birches meet." He nodded again. "Well," she went on, "there's water running there now. There's never been water there. It smells the same as the brook. Fresh, like the rain last week." The hedgehog's eyes lit slightly. "The spring's spreading." "Spring? Yes, the one under the mill." The hare frowned. "You think that's good?" He smiled gently. "I think it's life doing what it knows best." The hare hesitated, then offered the herbs she'd been holding. "I brought these for you. Thought maybe you'd know how to use them. They've started growing at the edge of the hollow." The hedgehog took them carefully. Their scent was unfamiliar, something between mint and apple peel with a faint sweetness. He recognized none of them. "New growth," he murmured. "The forest is remembering." The hare tilted her head. Remembering what? That it can change. By midday, the frog had joined him again. Together, they followed the hare's directions down toward the meadow, where the air grew lighter and the grass rippled like fur under the breeze. The brook had forked, one arm curving gently through the meadow's lower edge. Its water, so clear the pebbles beneath glowed like coins. And where the hare had said, between the twin birches, a pool had formed overnight. It wasn't large, but it was deep and calm, rimmed by moss and scattered with the same white, star-shaped flowers that had appeared by the mill. The frog crouched beside it, peering in. "Looks like a mirror." "More like a memory," said the hedgehog. The frog glanced at him, puzzled. He pointed to the reflection, the trees, the sky, and faintly, beneath all that, a ripple of golden light that seemed to pulse upward from the pool's depths. "That's the mill's heart, reaching further." The frog blinked slowly. "You talk like the forest is alive." "It is. Fair. But what happens when it keeps spreading? We'll have ponds in our front doors soon. Then we'll build bridges." "Bridges? Yes. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" The frog groaned, but smiled anyway. "You sound like the old badger when you say things like that." "Good. Someone has to." They spent the rest of the afternoon building a small barrier of stones and moss around the new spring. Not to stop it, but to guide its flow, letting it feed into the meadow's lower ground without flooding the hare's burrow. As they worked, bees moved lazily through the air, drawn by the flower's faint scent. The frog paused, watching them circle. "You think they know where all this started?" "Maybe," said the hedgehog. "Or maybe they just go where the sweetness calls." When evening fell, the forest felt alive in a way neither of them could quite describe. The air thrummed softly, not with sound, but with something like rhythm, a pulse that one didn't hear so much as feel in the chest. The squirrel from a northern oak came by, carrying acorns still damp from the rain. He said the moss had started glowing faintly by the riverbank at night. The owl, who had perched high above listening, mentioned that the field mice had begun storing their food closer to the brook because it felt safer there. Word spread quietly, through branches and roots and whispers. Something had healed, and everything knew it. A week later, the frog and the hedgehog took a longer walk, beyond the usual paths, past the stretch of birches and the sleeping willows, into the older parts of the forest where few ever went. The air there was different. Cool, hushed, full of echoes. They found a hollow where the ground dipped low and the trees grew close together. It was there they noticed the roots, intertwined, thick, and glowing faintly golden where the soil had washed away. They pulsed in rhythm, slow and sure. The frog crouched, mesmerized. "It's all connected," he whispered. The hedgehog nodded. "Every leaf, every drop. Even us. Us." He smiled faintly. "We're just smaller threads in the same weave." For a long time, they said nothing. The sound of the mill carried faintly even here, a deep, comforting hum beneath the earth. The forest breathed around them, alive, listening. Finally, the frog said quietly, "I think I understand what you meant. About care working better than wonder." The hedgehog looked at him with kind eyes. "Do you?" "Yes," said the frog, his voice soft. "Wonder fades. Care grows." That evening, they cooked near the brook again. This time, they tried something new. They roasted the strange herbs the hare had given them with mushrooms and wild onions. The smell was rich, earthy, and slightly sweet. When they tasted it, both froze. "It does taste like honey," said the frog in disbelief. The hedgehog chuckled. Then the forest really does have a sense of humor. They ate in silence for a while, watching the moon rise through the trees, the light catching the surface of the brook. Fireflies drifted lazily above the water, and the steady hum of the mill filled the night. When the frog leaned back at last, full and content, he sighed. "If the world stayed like this forever, I wouldn't mind." The hedgehog smiled at the stars. "It won't, but that's what makes it precious." The frog turned his head, puzzled. "Then what do we do when it changes?" The hedgehog tapped his walking stick lightly against the ground. "We notice, and we care again." The frog nodded slowly, eyes half closed. The night deepened around them, the forest breathing, the brook singing, the old mill turning. And for once, there was nothing left to fix. Just the rhythm of life, gentle and complete. The end. Thank you for wandering through the woods with me. If you'd like to return for more quiet stories and soft moments, don't forget to follow the trail back. Like, subscribe, and I'll meet you again under the green canopy soon.